in the brochure when they were talking to me, right? So, so here we are, I'm the chief of EMS now. It's been almost 3 years. It's been an incredibly challenging 3 years. And along my way, I have learned so much. And it just is so exciting for me to share it with people who are going to be leaders or already leaders, because we are generally the same people, right? The people that come out on a Saturday morning to the Queen's Botanical Garden to talk about EMS leadership are the same people. Like we're family here. This is why this is such an important event for me. So I hope that I'm going to give you some good information, but I'm not going to change your life. I promise you, and I apologize all at the same time. I'm going to keep it very basic. I'm going to bring it back to the lessons of leadership, the things I've done not so well, so that you can learn from that as we move on. So we're going to talk about two different things. We're going to talk about some of the actions that lead a workforce to feeling invisible. Because no matter where you come from, no matter what organization you're leading, the single most critical thing to know as a leader is how to interact with your people. Without your people, you have no one to lead, right? So you have to make sure that they are your #1 priority. And there's lots of challenges that come along with that. With leadership also comes the need for a very thick skin. Because there is always a group of people who want to criticize every move and, bring your name into, a negative space. And you have to be okay with that and know that we can move on beyond that, and that a single person or a single small group of people are generally not representing the masses, right? So you have to be okay with dealing with your people, but they are your #1 priority, no matter where you're coming from, no matter what size your organization. And then we're going to talk about some tactics, and I hope that you're going to help me figure out how to not make that happen, how to not make people feel invisible. And when I say, we're the same people, we are the same people. We come from the same places. We have shared experience. We come from families where we learned leadership, lessons, right? Didn't you learn how to be a leader from some of the things that you saw in your family? I certainly did. My mom was a single mom, and we were a family of 4 children. There's way more story to that, because I know single mom, 4 kids don't necessarily add up, but that's how it was, right? And I was the oldest of the 4. I'm still the oldest of the 4. I've been trying to change that for years, and it hasn't happened. So I was the oldest of 4, and my mom was, juggling a lot. And I would, watch how she kind of navigated things to try to make sure that everybody had what they needed. And I was a little bit of an overachiever, and maybe some of you could relate to this, being we're all sitting here on a Saturday, right? So I'm guessing there's a lot of overachievers in this room, but I was a little bit of an overachiever. And, I was good at school. I needed to get straight A's. If I got anything less than a 99, I was, needing therapy. So I was very self-motivated. My brother, who is 3 years younger than me, not so much. He didn't really care much about grades. In fact, when he passed something, it was an extraordinary celebration in my house. And I didn't understand this, because, I would bring home A's all the time, and my mom would just say, nice. My brother would bring home a C, and we would have ice cream parties. What happens in here? What is happening? Now, trust me, I don't need therapy, so don't worry for me. I'm okay. I'm past this. I'm just using this as an example of how I learned some of the lessons in leadership, watching my single mother try to navigate these 4 kids. So what happens? Well, much like this, she was like a triage mom. So the worst is the first, right? The worst makes you first. So when you have to divvy up your attention and divvy up your ability to make difference, you have to prioritize. And for a room of EMS people, we call that triaging, right? We triage the things that need us the most. And it's generally the worst things. The other stuff can wait. Now that happens with people too. I was not somebody who needed extra attention. My brother was somebody who needed extra attention. He needed extra encouragement. Therefore, he got more attention, right? He got more attention from my mother. Whether it was negative or positive attention didn't matter. It was attention, right? So does that happen in all families? Have you done that yourself? Do you have your own children who are like, you know, one's getting straight A's and the other one you're just praying doesn't get arrested before they're 18? You know, like, and for the one that's getting straight A's, you're like, they're good, right? They're okay, keep going, nice job, pat them on the head, move on. And the other one, you're, you know, following after them and checking their room and doing all the other stuff that you do to keep kids in line. So, you know, this happens all the time. And these are the kind of, you know, lessons that we learn moving up in our lives. And then we become parents. Some of you have not crossed that line yet. Good luck to you when you do. But then we become parents, and we have to learn how to prioritize, right? We have to learn how to problem solve. And then we, you know, take jobs like EMTs and paramedics who are all about like problem solving and prioritizing. So these things come from very deep rooted within us. And then we learn how to translate them into our work world. Does that make sense? Right? So it is way more than just me standing here saying, let me tell you how to be a leader, because quite honestly, I'm not so sure I'm so good at it. You know, I do the best that I can, and I try to make reasonable decisions, and people still follow me, but they don't have much of a choice, right? So, you know, I do the best I can, and I try to learn these lessons so that the folks that I work with, the other leaders in the department, get to also learn from these lessons. And we talk about these things all the time because leadership is somewhat fluid. What works on one thing may not work on another thing. And it's the same thing with your kids, right? What works with one kid may not work with another kid. So, you know, we have to be able to be dynamic, but we are problem solvers by nature. Now, this is where I'm going to take you to a different place. Problem solving seems like that's a reasonable skill to have at these levels. And it is. But what I will say is, I think for me, my ability to problem solve and my desire to problem solve became the problem, right? At some point in my career, that actually was the problem. My target, my laser focus on solving problems made me triage and look for only the bad. And what happens when you're in a leadership position and all you ever see is the worst of the worst? What do you think happens? Anybody? You get jaded, right? You think everything around you is this bad. And that is just not the case. Everything around you is not that bad. It's just the stuff that you're seeing, right? Because the other things have been handled at the lower levels. The good things are the kids making straight A's. You don't even know about them because you don't have to. They're out there and they're doing the best job they can do, and they're making progress, and they're saving lives, and they're not giving anybody a hard time, and they're being polite, and they're, you know, really enjoying their world, and therefore we don't need to solve their problem. So until they have a problem, they are invisible. That makes sense? And invisible kids, an invisible workforce, invisible people can start to feel like they have a lower morale. Like, why don't you see me? Why isn't my A on the fridge? Why are we giving this person who's getting a C or a D all the attention? What about me? And when you have a workforce that's either, you know, 10, 100,000, 4,000, it's important to be able to recognize the great work that people do, even though it takes up your time, right? Because, you know, time is valuable. And when we're problem solving mode, we're just looking for problems. So I'm going to say that there is a saying that I know I've heard throughout the 30 years, and maybe you have heard, and it says, you know, we spend 90% of our time on 10% of our workforce. Everybody hear that before? And that 10% of our workforce are the people who have had challenges, right? Those are the ones that file all the way up to the highest priority on that triage scale. So we're dealing with those. And we're at 90% of our time is spent on these 10% of people who may or may not really want to do the job. They may just need some training. They may need some education. They may need some encouragement. They may need somebody to help them find their potential, their confidence, but some of them may not be in a best place. And what that does is it leaves 90% of the people, if that is true, if those numbers are true, and please, I don't have specific numbers, so these are generalizations, but if that is true, what happens to 90% of your workforce? They feel neglected, right? So now we give the attention to the people who are struggling, no attention to the people who are doing great. And what does that make the people who do a great think? Well, why do I have to work so hard, right? Why do I have to work so hard if it doesn't really matter? And the only impact, or the only, let's say, interaction that some of those straight A students may have is when they make a mistake. And they could be doing things great for years, and all of a sudden you make a mistake, and now we're having an interaction. And that just reinforces their thought that, only when I do something bad do I get this interaction, because Chief, you haven't talked to me and I've been here for 10 years. And all of a sudden now we're talking. So, I'm going to challenge you to think about this in a different way and say, what we need to do to change the trajectory of EMS, but any organization, is to turn the tables and put 90% of our attention on the 90% that are doing great, and 10% of our attention on the people who aren't doing great. We're going to talk about those separately. So the people who are not doing great need to do better, right? So how do we get them to not feel invisible, right? Because this is the workforce we're leading, right? The 90% who feel invisible, the 10% who are like, hey, come and get me, you can't do nothing to me, right? So how do we get that 90% to not feel invisible and that 10% to comply? Well, I think we got to give them some attention, right? So rather than spend time going around trying to fix everybody's problems, spend that time trying to celebrate publicly and acknowledge the good work that people are doing. So that takes a whole lot more work and a whole lot more time. But there are things that make people feel like you see them. I can give you specific examples for me, but that might not be the same for your organization. So you would have to come up with your own, but just a couple of examples. One is we have a unit of the month celebration, right? So we have, let's say, 40 EMS stations. There are a couple of hundred people. So the unit that has the best stats for the month gets submitted through their captains, and then we'll pick amongst the city the one unit of the month who perform the best. And that is something that we've always had, but we've always gone to the station, they give a little plaque. What we did differently was we invited them up to headquarters and I took them to lunch. So they came up, they got to meet the commissioner, they got to meet the first deputy commissioner, they met all the chiefs. We'd spend the afternoon together, and we would go to lunch, and I would eat like nobody has ever eaten before, because it's on my dime. I'm going to the place I like the most, right? Unfortunately, the pandemic killed them, so we got to find a new place. But bringing them up to headquarters, spending the day with them, letting them sit down with the commissioner, talk about EMS, talk about the great job they've done. Those are important things, and people remember those. We were able to put, a plaque up with their names on it. So anybody who wins it, we engrave it and we have it up at headquarters. So when they come up to headquarters, they see their name up there. They see pictures of their ceremony on our scrolling screen. They come to meet with us. And then, we work with the officers to say, hey, if you're seeing somebody doing a great job, let me know. Because while I'm out in the field, I will track them down and say, your officer thought so highly of you that they mentioned it to me. So I just wanted to come and talk to you and tell you what a great job you're doing. And this is exactly what I expect of people who are going to work here. And you're such a great example. Please, keep doing that. And thank you. Right. So these little things, it does not cost a ton of money to make people feel like they have value. And knowing that EMS people are compassionate people of emotion, right? They feel like they're going to have the answer for somebody in their worst medical experience of their lifetime sometimes. These are folks that are willing to leave their own families, much like you, much like me, no matter what the situation is, to serve somebody else, right? To give them everything they need at their time of need. These are the folks we're dealing with, and we owe it to them to make them feel like they are valued, like what they do is important, because it is. So think about that. 90% of my time needs to be on 90% of my people. Now, what do we do about the 10%? Well, that's easy. The 10%, we first offer them opportunity to be better. And how do we do that? We can do that through training. We can do that through very direct conversation, right, about what they understand as being the expectations. We can put it straight out there and say, hey, here's what you're doing and here's what you need to do. And I'm here to help you get from point A to point B. But you are expected to get from point A to point B. This is not an option. I'm just helping you get there. And then for those people who just simply will not get out of their own way, you employ your agency's, policies, whatever that is, and you do it without regret. You're not doing anything to somebody, right? So we want the good to be the example, the public example of what is expected. And what is it that we want? We want that to be the example. So when we're dealing with the 10%, we can say, do you see this behavior? This is the example of what is acceptable. This is where you need to be. So we're going to help you get there. And if you can't get there, then we need to reconsider your choices, because, EMS is a choice. No matter whether you're a volunteer, you work for a commercial ambulance, or you're working for a municipal agency, it is a choice. Nobody threw a pillowcase over your head and dragged you in, right? So you have to think about what the choices are so that, you can find your dream. We got one shot at this life, right? So maybe this is not your dream, but as long as it is, we have to continue to do 110% because people's lives depend on us. And there was no better time to put that into the public than during this last pandemic. And during this last pandemic, we were all in this game, were we not? I activated everything I could activate. We had the national ambulance contract that came in from all over the country. We had our volunteers that were activated. We had our commercials that were activated, our voluntary hospitals that were activated. This pandemic was an all hands EMS event. We were family coming together, no matter what the patch says on your arm, to save the people of New York City, to save the people who needed saving. And we got sick along the way. And then we came back, right? So it was an incredible experience, but we're all responsible for this. So a little bit of acknowledgement goes a whole lot of ways. So how do we break through? What are some things that you can do to help people understand, what you expect, or how to make them feel like they're valued? Some of these things are so incredibly simple, which is why I said I'm not going to change your life. I'm going to offer you things like, here's an important tidbit. Say please. Say thank you. Right? I know it's amazing, right? What I'm asking you to do. Like, just that goes so far. Say please and say thank you. And don't say it with an attitude, right? Like, yeah, thanks. Yeah, not that, right? But thank you. Like, please do this. Thank you for doing that. Or thank you for the job you do. So simple, but you know, how we are perceived as leaders is very different than how you perceive yourself as a leader. For me, if I were to walk in a room and maybe be sidetracked or thinking about something or just gotten off of a phone call and I'm like in my own zone and somebody says good morning to me and I don't respond, that is a wildfire. Do you understand that? Right? How would you feel? Right? How would you feel about it if I just walked in and, you know, we worked together and I just kind of ignored you? Your entire day would be filled with like telling people how I dissed you in the morning, right? And at some point you would be mad at me and I would not know why. Right? So it is important that we understand as leaders, you need to make yourself available to the people around you. You know, simple stuff. Smile, make eye contact, shake a hand, keep social distance, whatever's happening, right? Whatever's happening. But you know, remember that they deserve your time because you're asking them to do something, right? So what you give back is your availability and your time. And sometimes those two things are very hard to find. But you know, for me, I recognized early in my career that I was getting it wrong and I was spending so much time just problem solving, that I was missing the whole picture. I was doing exactly to EMS what my mom did in my household. It was like, the worst is the first. And everybody else just sit aside. So how do we motivate them to continue to move up the ranks? Because we together are the steward of EMS. We're still a very young profession compared to fire and PD and sanitation, so to speak. And I tell this story because it still baffles me sometimes, but when I came on as a young EMT, I knew like one of the first female paramedics in New York City, like personally. And that is how young our service still is. So although we've made a lot of progress and we still, you know, think that, you know, we should be like this one or like that one, there's still over 100 years head start on us. So we are the stewards of EMS. We are paving the path of our future. And each one of us have that responsibility. So it's not easy. And there's a lot of different opinions along the way. Generally, noisemakers don't make progress, right? So let that be a lesson for you. People who make noise generally don't make progress. People who make progress generally don't make noise, right? So, you know, those folks that are yelling about how terrible you are and what you're doing, it's just noise. Keep going. You are building a better EMS system with every time you show up, right? Every time we get a new person in the door to volunteer, that is a pathway, right? That is me 30 years ago when I walked in the doors of Neck Volunteer Ambulance Corps. And I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. And I wasn't intending to stay very long. I was intending to stay very short periods of time and then go to medical school, which is where my brain said I should be. And then I fell in love with EMS. And I've loved it ever since. And I'm not embarrassed to say it out loud, right? I'll profess my love for EMS out loud. It doesn't make me uncool, right? But you know, the kid that walked in at Throg's Neck had no idea that she was going to be running or leading the biggest EMS system in the country at some point. So, you know, that's how that happens. And along the way, I had amazing people who just kept me going, kept me motivated. kept me loving what I'm doing, showed me good things, right? So we have to build trust. We have to work together. We have to not tear each other down. No matter where we come from, we are EMS. And if you ask any of the folks that I work with, EMS for me, EMS, my expectation, means elevate, motivate, and support. And if you're not doing one of those three things, then you are on the wrong path. You need to come back. Elevate, motivate, support. That's what EMS means to me at a leadership level. So that's our guide. When we start going off the rails and we start thinking everything is terrible because of all these things we see, we just take a moment and we say, the terrible is only what gets to us. The wonderful is the stuff that's happening out there. The terrible is a small percentage. The wonderful is the larger masses, right? So let's go celebrate those folks. It gives you your own motivation when you go out there and see people smiling and doing wonderful jobs. EMS is an amazing institution, an amazing profession. We are the front line of every public health emergency imaginable. That's us. Can you imagine a world without EMS? Can you imagine a city without EMS? Can you imagine all those gunshot wounds, stabbings, cardiac arrests, all those things that people see on the news every single day include EMS being on the scene? So our job is to make sure that people understand that no matter what their problem is, no matter what they believe in, no matter who they love, no matter where they come from, no matter how much money they make, EMS is going to show up for them. And we have proven that over and over again. And we have to continue to prove that. And that's what we'll do. We build trust amongst our workforce, and we build trust with the people who put their lives in our hands, or the lives of their family members, the people they love the most, in our hands. That's my dog, because who doesn't love dogs, right? So we have a long way to go, and we'll get there, but it's the very basics that make good leaders. I'll keep trying to achieve that, and I hope you will too. And when you have, when you have questions about it, or you start to get derailed, or you start to think everything is terrible, just know that you're only at the top of the triage, right? You're the one who gets the most terrible things put on your desk, because nobody below you has been able to solve those problems. But the bigger masses are the wonderful things. And don't be afraid to get out there and tell people about how amazing EMS is, because they truly are amazing. And you are amazing. And you continue to be amazing. And I know that because you're here with me on Saturday. Okay? So thank you for the wonderful job you do. And thank you on behalf of all those thousands and thousands and thousands of lives that get saved because you said yes. You said, put me in. I don't need to get paid. I'll do it. But I'll do it too, right? No matter where. Because you said yes, people will live. Because you continue to recertify, people will live. You add on to generations with your skill. There are folks that will see graduations and weddings because you said yes. That is incredible. So thank you for what you do, and please continue to do that. I will forever be a supporter of all volunteers, all EMS, no matter where they come from. And I'm sure this summer, as I'm making my way around the city with our town halls, that I'll be visiting you as well. Okay? So thanks so much, everybody. And go. Yeah. Thank you.
This question is sort of forefront in city volunteers. Work through a municipality that they are supported through. But a lot of the volunteer organizations in the city are struggling. You know what I'm saying? So what contribution the city might provide?
That's a great question. So the question is, what type of resources could the city help you with so that you don't have the struggle that you're having trying to survive? And I have to tell you that I don't even know the answer to that question because I don't deal with the fiscal end of things. But what I can say is FDNY EMS has been incredibly supportive of volunteers. And we have like given out cell phones with the CAD system into it. We're trying to augment some of the responsibilities that you have so that you don't have to accept that fiscal responsibility. So where we can help, we generally do. And I do look in our future to us having more of a collaborative type relationship where maybe you're doing fundraisers and we're coming out and we're assisting, we're coming to things like this and supporting you and helping you raise the money that you need to raise. So wherever EMS operations and the FDNY can help, they will, but obviously that that's not an easy thing to overcome. Yes. Okay, all right, okay. Should I turn this mic off or am I gonna, oh, that mic, okay.
Can you hear me? Can
Do I
everyone
need
hear?
to repeat the
Great.
questions now? No. Okay.
Cool. All right.
Yes.
We were chatting earlier, Chief Bonsignore, and you mentioned the term bloodlines, and you were talking about recruiting folks into EMS service, whether it's a volunteer service or the municipal service. You were talking about establishing that, your mother was an EMT, your cousin was an EMT, and one would then grow up and think that is something I could do, whether I'm doing it as a career or a volunteer. How do you deepen that? How do we recruit the next generation? How do we keep this going? How do you make those bloodlines really work?
That's an awesome question. So, I feel very passionate about bloodlines. I attempted it myself. My daughter actually did work for the fire department for several years. It was hard to have me as her mom, I think, but it was a little hard. I was a boss at the time. But I think the bloodlines are so important. And when I talk about bloodlines, it's in a context that, we see fire, right? We see PD, and they have 100+ years head start on us. And the reason they are very deep rooted into the raising of their children, where the kids, like this is like a no-brainer. When they get older, they're either gonna follow in their parents' footsteps. Some of them don't, right? Our kids are getting a little ahead of themselves somewhere. But EMS only became a modern system, like the modern system that we have. I mean, EMS been around a long time, but the modern EMS system that we had only existed since the mid-70s, which is why I was able to know the first female paramedic in New York City and still be alive, right? So we now are starting to see some bloodline go on. We're starting to see some EMS elders, let's say, and their children start to come in. And now at the 30-year mark, I'm starting to see some of those children, right? They're starting to like filter into the system, and we have to do that. The one thing that we have to do to make sure that we have the bloodline is expose your children to this. And I think sometimes in EMS profession, we don't want to talk about it because the stuff we see is so gruesome and tragic. And we don't have to share those stories, but we do have to share the stories of how we respond and our responsibility, our roles in those events, and how this is something they can do. And I think exposing them, especially at the volunteer level, without making them commit to multiple tours, like just saying, hey, come ride with me. Let me just show you this, right? Let me show you how this goes. Bring your kids, bring your grandkids, like start to let them hang out and see how things work. And we'll get there, but we're starting. But it's so important that we just not be embarrassed or not be protective over the information about EMS and not be a victim, right? Like we are not victims. We are doing this by choice. So FDNY runs a high school. We have our own high school. And, we teach those kids about EMS and fire. We have several hundred people now who have been hired out of that high school in East New York into the EMS system or into the fire system. So I think each one of us have a responsibility to build the bloodline, and we have to do that through constant messaging and, maybe text the kids. I don't know, they're not looking at you anymore. Like just shoot them a text or something about EMS, but we definitely have to keep them involved, and I think we will.
Hello.
Hi.
I don't know if I got an email from the state Thursday on Thursday that we were the only state in the country that couldn't, that fire departments couldn't charge insurance for EMS calls. As of Thursday, they passed a law that New York State volunteer fire departments in the state can charge insurances for EMS calls. We're the only state in the country that couldn't do it. They're trying it starting, it started Thursday. Fire departments, volunteer fire departments can charge for EMS calls to the insurance. They don't charge the victim, they charge the insurances. We're the only state that couldn't charge, but as of Thursday, we're allowed to charge, which is about time.
Yeah. So, when I talk about paving the path of our future, right? Like we are not at the end, not anywhere close to the end. We're still like in the beginning stages of this profession and building this profession. That's an example, right? Every time, time goes by, things change. We have moved the FDNY from, I'm going to use this wording because you understand it. I don't support this wording, two-man stretchers, right? So it as two-man stretchers. I know it as two people stretchers, two-person stretchers. But, it was like you had to get on both sides. And we are, that's where I was when I came in. And we just switched. We're in a process of switching to power load stretchers, right? Now, it's been 30 years, but it's progress. And there are going to be people who come onto this job that never know what it was to have you and your partner on either side of a stretcher with somebody who is injured or sick and have to lift them up and slide them into an ambulance. There'll be people who never know what that was like. Like there are people who will never know what a PCR, a paper PCR was like, right? Because everybody's in a tablet now. Like these are the things that I'm talking about. The progress that we made is going to shape our future EMS system. So we can't be shy about pushing things forward. And I will tell you that if there is one thing that EMS people absolutely agree on, is that they hate change. But I will tell you that once change has occurred, they will hate the change you make after that, right? So it's okay, just push past it. It goes away, it's like a wave, and then everybody just, settles in, and then it's all good. So let's continue to do that. That's great. Hopefully that helps with your financial end of things.
First, as the president of the New York State Volunteer Ambulance and Rescue Association and Glen Oaks Volunteer Ambulance, I want to thank you for your embrace of volunteer EMS in the city. It's been a sea change and very appreciated. I want to thank Matthew for hosting this here today, because this is a much needed discipline in EMS. Just a couple of statements and then a real question. One is, as the chief said, EMS is a new profession. I mean, and may not seem to some of you in this room, but New York State didn't even have a law on EMS until the mid-1970s. Yep. No law on the books, didn't exist in statutory law. And as the chief said, systems only really came into existence shortly thereafter. So we are a very new service. The other thing I'll say about billing is be careful, it's a double-edged sword. Let me explain why. It leads towns and villages and communities to think that billing is the source of all revenue for EMS. And to have a vibrant, disciplined, and dedicated EMS system, the local government has to support it beyond billing.
billing is not the be all and end all. It's the recognition by local governments in New York State that EMS is a vital and important services and needs to be supported on a regular basis, just like they support their fire department and police department. You know, we've lost 15% of certified personnel over the last 2 years. It's felt in the volunteer sector. It's felt in the career sector. We all need to be concerned about that. And that's not just a trend in New York. It's a trend we're hearing from our colleagues around the country. In some cases, some states are even having bigger problems. So now the question, do you find that there are generational differences in the kind of recognition, the kind of appreciation, the reaction to that and the expectations, and how do you address that?
Thank you for that question. So one, I will agree with you that, you know, billing is a tremendous obstacle to the existence of EMS systems. And there are larger conversations, and I think we have a collective EMS voice that says that EMS needs to be recognized as an essential service, and it needs to be recognized on all levels as an essential service and an emergency service. We're not even really determined to be an emergency service, and it needs to be funded accordingly. So I do agree with you there, but you know, billing is better than nothing, I think, at this point, right? So it's a start. As far as the generational gaps, I really don't think so. I think, you know, people who come to a job of service, no matter what that service is, or have very similar qualities, whether no matter what their generation is. I think, you know, at one point, I was a hip hop kid, you know, doing like breakdancing in the street, but, you know, loving EMS. And now we have, you know, very technology savvy kids who are, you know, living in a different world than I lived in, that still come to EMS and love EMS. I think what we see is generational differences. The one thing I will add to that conversation is for us, for the people who are older and have been around a long time, you are never going to make a new generation think the way you think. You have the responsibility to bend to them. They don't have the responsibility to bend to you. So if you are trying to make them do something or teach them how to do something the way you want to do it, that may not work, right? So we have to come up with new and innovative ways to get that training into the newer generations, to communicate with them on the levels that they understand, to embrace technology. When I was growing up in EMS, if you had any kind of technology in a room, you were cheating. Right now, everybody has a phone, a watch, I don't know, a necklace, a bracelet, you know, your rings talk to you now. So, you know, we're in a different place. So we have to embrace how people learn. And the way to do that is to incorporate people from that generation and listen to them, right? Us older folks don't always want to listen to the younger people about how to engage, but they bring a tremendous amount of information. So I think there's a couple of things there you do. Is don't expect that they're going to learn the way you want to learn. It's just not going to happen. We're in two different places. Ask them how they want to learn and then make it happen, right?
Back here.
Yep.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. It's kind of a two-part question. So let's say you had a time machine and you could go back to the day you started as a boss and give yourself one piece of advice that would make you a better manager tomorrow. What would that be? And how could that be applied to volunteer EMS?
Yeah, great question. So I think if I could go back, I would tell my younger self, don't be so sensitive, right? Don't be so sensitive. Like for people like us who are overachievers, who want to do the best thing that we can do, criticism can be difficult to handle. And it could make you think that everybody feels this way, that everybody thinks this way, and it makes you second guess your abilities and your knowledge base and your approaches. And I think I spent a little too much time worrying about what everybody else was saying. So I would immediately say, don't worry about those noisy people are just noise. They generally don't make progress. There's got to be somebody to criticize you to keep it interesting, right? If everybody loved you, it'd be boring, right? So don't worry about that. Just be secure with what you're trying to do. And then I would say to myself as a younger boss, and not that I had this issue, but just as a reminder, if you are here to serve yourself, you are on the wrong path. If you are here to serve others, you're going to have an extraordinary career. And never mix those two things up. And if you're ever in this position where you're looking to self-serve or you're looking to just make it better for you, you have gone down the dark alley and need to come back. This is a career of service to others. And that in a leadership position, serve those around you, right? Serve those around you. You are a scaffold for the people who do the job as a leader. I don't know if that helps you to volunteer, but it certainly would have helped me as a younger boss. Yes.
All right, we have one more question,
Okay.
and this came from the virtual audience. It says, as the chief mentioned, the fire department relied regularly on volunteer ambulance services during the pandemic and during other surges in call volume. How successfully does she feel that the volunteers have worked within the 911 system? And does she anticipate more regular or permanent integration of the volunteer services into the 911 system?
Oh, what a wonderful question. So first of all, yes, absolutely. They did a tremendous job, as did everybody who we called on for help. And I think that is the nature of EMS, right? Things were hard. This is a big city, and we were the epicenter and the first really big hit city at the beginning of this pandemic. And we went from doing 4,000 assignments a day to doing 6,500. Like that was insane. This was an all hands for EMS, and EMS shined, right? They came out, the volunteers came out, everybody came out, and they did a tremendous job. And as we continue to go through these surges, the fire department sees the volunteers as being part of our system, our bigger system. So yes, you can assume that we're going to ask you to, participate in certain things that come around. And I do in the future hope that we see the volunteers being integrated into the 911 system. Now, what that's going to take to make that happen might be a whole different ball game. But if there is one thing I need to be clear about is that EMS is a community. And no matter where you're working in that community, you are still EMS. And when our city, who we've chosen to serve, is in trouble, then we all need to stand on the front line together. So you can expect that I'm going to continue to push that agenda. And, I'll come out and visit all the volunteers and hopefully we can talk about what we can do to try to help you, sustain or some of the things that you need that we can assist with. And together we'll continue to serve our city. Yep. All right.
All right, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank you.